Imagine for a second you get only one physical life. Not hard to imagine, right? That's all we get, one physical life. But now imagine living that life to be 100 years old. And imagine maybe living that 100 years on your own without obesity, without heart disease, without diabetes, without the threat of cancer. Now imagine you could live that life, eat 2 pounds of chocolate a week, have a little wine every day. That's just what the longest confirmed lifespan in history did, Janine Clement. Or what about the longest current living person? She lived on her own till the age of 115. She's now 117. It credits her long life to eating raw eggs. Or what about the village of Acroli, Italy, where 1 in 10 lives to be 100 and 20% of those live to be 110. And they eat a little rosemary with every meal, and some wine. Now, what about the Okinawans? They live an average lifespan of 110. But they eat sweet potatoes. What do all of these folks have in common? Well, I'm here to tell you there is a pattern that threads all these long, healthy lives together. And if we can identify and live out this pattern, we can change the way that our people live and the way that they develop. But this brings me to another scenario to imagine. Imagine this. Picture yourself in a room full of people, all right? Say there's several hundred people in this room. You got that picture? Now, imagine, as I tell you the statistics, you mark each individual affected by the statistic, all right? So 1 in 2 males gets cancer. Mark them. 1 in 3 females gets cancer. Mark them. 1 in 10 of these people over the age of 20 is diabetic. Mark them. 60% of them are on medications. Mark them. 70% of them are overweight. Mark them. 1 in 4 will die of heart disease. There again, you don't really have to work real hard to imagine this, because this is what's true of the United States. These are the statistics that our people have to live with. But I'm here to tell you it doesn't have to be true. We understand experientially through the people that I just mentioned living these long, healthy lives, what it takes to do so, and we even know it scientifically. The problem is there's so much information today and so many different angles that we hear it that we have a hard time rationalizing all the information. Even if it was simple, we have a hard time rationalizing the information. And this pattern that I'm about to explain to you is extremely simple, but we must rationalize it. So I want to start this off with a short story in history about being rational. Dr. Samuel Weiss was an Hungarian doctor who worked for the University of Vienna, and he worked in an obstetrical clinic where women came to have babies. Parallel to his clinic was a second clinic. In his clinic, they trained doctors. In the other clinic, they trained midwives. All right? But it became known in the community that the death rate from childbed fever in Samuel Weiss's clinic was fluctuate greatly, but sometimes as high as 35%. But in the other clinic, where the midwives were training, it would be around 4%. So as the community started to understand this, when women came there to have their babies and they found that they might get admitted to the first clinic, they didn't want to do that. So they started having their babies in the street. They called it street births. Well, after looking into this, come to find out when the women were having their babies in the street, the death rate for childbed fever was similar to that of the midwife clinic's death rate at around 4%. Well, then Samuel Weiss knew that he had a problem in his clinic. And making a long story short, he went back to his clinic, and this is what he found. His doctors in training were doing autopsies in the morning on dead bodies, and then going and delivering babies throughout the day without washing their hands. Ugh. So, he just introduced this simple idea. Now understand, this is before the germ theory, before we knew there were little bugs and creatures crawling around causing us problems and diseases and fevers and so on and so forth. So what he introduced was the idea of using a chlorinated lime solution for the doctors in training to wash their hands. Within just a couple of months, he had the death rate of his clinic down near similar to that of the midwife clinic. And then after carrying the practices further, starting to cleanse surgical areas and cleanse surgical utensils, they got the death rate near zero. Folks, he had the problem. One day people are dying. The next day they are not dying. He had the smoking gun. He solved the problem. So those around there immediately saw it. But as they went out to tell the rest of Europe, they're again making a long story short. There was no germ theory. Like, oh, so you can't explain why? And then the doctors were like, you mean we are the problem? Excuse me? And in turn, no one listened. It was 20 years before this obvious, simple information was put into place and affected the public in a positive way. 20 years. Why? Because they could not rationalize the information. They could not take it in and compute it and make a better decision. Folks, I have a pattern I'm about to present to you that is going to change child development. It's going to change disease. It's going to change how long we live. But you have to be willing to rationalize the information, no matter how simple it might seem. So there's 3 parts to this pattern that have us in this box of living out unhealthy lives. All right? The first one is sugar. Yes, we've all heard about sugar, and we've all heard how bad it is for us. But what's the problem? If we know it's so bad, how come things don't change? I mean, we're 60% on meds, 70% overweight, 1 in 10 over the age of 20 is diabetic. So many sick people. What's going on? The problem is that bad doesn't mean anything to us, right? When you look at a cookie, right? If you're rational, you would think about the true reality outcome of eating that cookie. The cookie representing all the sugar that we eat, right? So who looks at a cookie and thinks, oh, 60% on medication, 70% overweight, 1 in 10 is a diabetic. If you looked at a cookie and those were your thoughts, it would be different. But we hear so much about sugar and how it's bad for us, and we get all these different pictures, but I still don't think we realize how much sugar we consume every day. So I want to try to paint a different picture in your mind of what's going on in our society. So I want to tell that with a little story. I went in to have lunch with my son one day at school, and I sat down at the table, and across from me sat this little boy, and this is what he had. He had these mandarin oranges right here. Fruit, right? Good stuff. Or He also had these fishy crackers. And the Twix yogurt, everybody knows yogurt's good for you, right? And fish has got to be the quintessential health food, so a fish sandwich and chocolate milk. So there you have it. A typical school lunch. Now you have this. And let this represent the sugar or junk food that we might consume in a day. All right? So we all know what happens when you feed a kid too much sugar, right? They become hyper. They go on this sugar roller coaster of their sugar boosting up and then coming back down. So, how many of these Snickers bars do you think would constitute a sugar rush? Now, these are not the mini ones, and they're not the full size. These are the fun size 15-gram Snickers bars. How many of those do you think you would have to eat yourself or let your child have that would constitute a sugar rush? Some of you might guess 1, some 2, even 4, maybe even 5 Snickers bars. But how many Snickers bars of sugar do you think were in that school lunch? Folks, there is 12 fun-sized Snickers bars worth of sugar in this school lunch. I mean, are you kidding me? And I don't think we understand. And actually, if the kid eats the lunch, the sugar will reach his blood faster than if he eats the candy bars. This milk here has more sugar than Coca-Cola. And what do? This is the part that grabs me. We feed it to this guy right here, this hyper metabolic kid. So all this sugar comes into his blood at one time, and he's like, I've got to burn it up. That's how I protect. That's how I get this sugar or acid out of my blood. All right? And so he goes on this sugar rush roller coaster, and up and then a crash. And then we send him to class and say, hey, pay attention. And, well, you can't pay attention? Well, here, let's have you checked out. Well, it appears you have attention deficit hyper disorder. We're going to give you some medications. Do we have any idea how ignorant this action is? These kids eat this every day. They've probably been eating like this every day since they were born. Yet we don't address it. ADHD in 2003 was at 7.8%. In 2007, 9.5%. In 2011, it was at 11%. It's going up 1.5% every 4 years. We could be somewhere around 14%. We feed a kid way too much sugar and then put him on attention deficit hyperactivity disorder medication. It's that simple. Don't kid yourself. Now, maybe not every kid has that rush, right? We got the hypo-metabolic kid. This tends to be your more laid-back child. So what happens when you feed him all the sugar? His pancreas kicks in insulin like nobody's business, and it gets ready to store that sugar. What chance does this kid have at a healthy life? I mean, childhood obesity has doubled in children and quadrupled in adolescents in the past 30 years. It was 7% in 1980. It was 18% in 2012. These poor kids walking around with all this extra weight and the stigmatism and the way they feel and the self-esteem issues that come with it. What are we doing? We're doing this, right? Unwrap a smile. We think little Debbie, if we open one of those, we get a big cheesy smile like this right here. Well, that's great. But if we're completely rational with the information and consider the true reality outcome, the picture looks a little more like this, doesn't it? We got the obese child, obese adults. We got medication rates of 60%, 1 in 10 over the age of 20 diabetic. So, this smile thing, right? Industry's fault, right? Well, Not really, or not exactly. What's going on with industry is an extremely simple scenario. There was one study done where we put sugar into an animal's food. And by the way, humans are animals. And when we put sugar in their food, we found they will eat up to 6 times as much food. Folks, it is industry's job by definition to make food we want to eat more of. If they put in sugar, we tend to eat 6 times as much. So guess what? They make food with more sugar. Oh, industry's so evil, right? Well, let me cut it a different way. Your grandma makes a mean apple pie, and she has an apple pie stand, right? But grandma finds out when she coats the crust with sugar, she sells twice as many apple pies. Does grandma coat her crust with sugar? Well, hell yeah, she does. Absolutely. I mean, that's how she takes the grandkids to do fun things and pays for her winter trip to Florida, right? So if grandma's going to sell us under the bus, so is industry. What this means is it's up to us to desire the right food. But if we cannot rationalize what is going on or the information, things will not change. And see, well-designed products are designed to act on us emotionally because we make emotional decisions. Just like this smile right here. Unwrap a smile. That's an emotion. They want to associate the emotion of joy with Little Debbie. And I was like, wow, I was reading this article and it's explaining this to me, and I'm like, that's so interesting. Well, I'd already put together this presentation, and I went back and looked. And look at this. Sunshine on the oranges, smiley face on the goldfish, smiley face on this yogurt, and that certainly looks like a happy cow to me. Folks, they are designing food based on our emotional decisions as opposed to our rational ones. We need to get rational. So recap this section. Sugar is a major problem in development and living a long life. So don't eat 12 fun-sized candy bars of sugar at every meal, and start making rational decisions. So that is number 1 in the pattern. All right. Number two is a very confusing subject. There's so many different reputations and ideas about this subject of fat. I am going to make it simple for you right now, once and for all. First of all, fat is the only substance that we can absorb through our digestive tract without the use of energy. It will literally, the right fats will literally just diffuse right into our digestive tract and be ready to be used as energy. Fat has its own metabolic process within our body. Fat is twice as energy dense as carbohydrates. The brain is 60% fat. Are we getting the understanding that fat is very important to our bodies? Hormones are made up of fat. But this last fact is the one that completely changed my perspective. It gave me a new understanding. When you take out water, after that, no matter how much muscle you have, the body is more fat than anything else. So, because every cell is made up of more fat than anything else. So this car here, picture that as your cell, okay? And all the yellow wall panels are made up of fat. And this is really a good analogy here. Like all the headlights and the mirrors and the glass and everything, those could represent all the protein sticking out of the cell. But everything that is yellow is fat, the membrane walls, right? Let me explain. So, there are three basic types of fat. There is a saturated fat, nice and organized molecule. There's a monounsaturated fat. It's got one double bond. And then there's polyunsaturated fat, poly meaning many spots. It's not saturated, all right? And these things pair up into what we call phospholipids. You don't need to remember all this. You just need to kind of get an idea or an understanding of what's going on. These phospholipids pair up and build these walls, these membranes, all right? And if you were just to envision your cell with a membrane, you might start to get this picture right here. This is all made up of fat, this membrane. Now let's look at a more detailed picture. See, this is a cell. You probably remember this from high school biology class. But every little one of these organelles is defined by a membrane. So every shape you see in here is composed of this fat membrane. All right. So no matter how much muscle you have or how lean your body is, even if you're walking around looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you still are made up of more fat than anything else. So this makes fat very important to our development and the structure of our body. So I'm going to explain the three basic types of fat. And after I explain them, we'll know which ones are good, we'll know which ones are bad, and why. So first of all, the first one is saturated. Look at that, a beautiful molecule. Again, very organized. And all these little white dots are hydrogen atoms, and they're very organized. So it'd be hard to break this down. So it doesn't oxidize very easily. And it looks like a Lincoln log. So it's a great building block. So they stack together very well. So that's why it's solid at room temperature, like you see this butter here. And the market says they're valuable. Butter, $24 a gallon. Coconut oil, $45 a gallon. Valuable stuff, right? And if I wanted to build a wall or a membrane, looks like a perfect building block. Next, I got monounsaturated. Mono, one, unsaturated. One spot where it's not saturated. One kink. I like to say this one spot where it could react or one of these hydrogens could get knocked off. But it's only one spot, and it's still a fairly organized molecule, and will build a great wall. All right? Olive oil, $30 a gallon. The market says it's still valuable. Lard, $13 a gallon. There again, a good fat. So the first two are good fats. The third one, polyunsaturated fat. Poly means many, unsaturated. Many spots where it's not saturated, we have these double bonds, and lots of spots for these little hydrogen atoms to get knocked off or for it to oxidize or break down. All right. And the market says it's not valuable. Corn oil, in comparison to the others anyhow, corn oil, $8 a gallon. Safflower oil, $4 a gallon. All right. And so this will oxidize easily. So instead of your cell looking like this, it will look like this, right? What's going on with the paint here? What do they call that? That's called oxidation, all right? So we're calling polyunsaturated fat the bad fat. Well, I want to read to you a review article about polyunsaturated fats, all right? A review article is an article that summarizes the current state of an understanding of a given topic. A review article surveys and summarizes previous published studies. Folks, this is what we already know about polyunsaturated fat. We already know this, all right? And I'm just going to read it and break it down for you as we go, all right? PUFAs, polyunsaturated fats, PUFA stands for polyunsaturated fat, are highly susceptible to pre-lipid oxidation and are prone to excision, getting cut out of the cell membrane like you see going on here by members of the PL2 family of enzymes. Folks, they are susceptible to oxidize easily and get cut out of the cell membrane. If you're trying to build a healthy cell and the membrane is getting cut apart, how healthy do you think it's going to be? Now, products of these are FFAs and PLAs themselves can act as signaling molecules to modify gating behavior of various ion channels. Folks, these ion channels control the fluid flow in and out of the cell. If we are modifying that, we are not improving it, all right? In addition, they can act as substrate for other lipid-based intra and extracellular signaling cascades, including signaling systems regulating inflammation. Folks, they are affecting inflammation, all right? Inflammation is believed to be the root of all disease, all right? I was reading an article the other day, and this was the title of that article. Harvard Health Publications, Playing with the Fire of Inflammation. Inflammation plays a central role in healing, but left to run wild, this process can lead to arthritis, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. Folks, this is what we already know about polyunsaturated fats. Moreover, their effect on membrane microarchitecture, they may change the functions of integral membrane proteins such as stretched activated ion channels, alter lipid microbiome organization, disrupt organization of transmembrane signaling complexes, or alter cellular processes such as membrane fission and fusion. Folks, fission and fusion are how our cells make energy. Polyunsaturated fats oxidizing are not helping our energy, all right? Otherwise, we'd all be running around like the Energizer Bunny. All right, and this fission and fusion that are important in the regulation of intrinsic neural excitability. Intrinsic neural excitability. Normal neural excitability. Well, this normal neural is probably our allergic reactions, or could even be our autoimmune problems, all right? Is also regulate synaptic transmissions. This is our ability to send signals through the nerves, all right? And molecular mechanisms underlying neuroplasticity. This is our ability to rearrange the nerves and make new connections and do different things. Folks, polyunsaturated fats oxidizing in our cells and in our body is not helping us, all right? This is what we already know. We can't let it take 20 years for us to rationalize this information and let it start to make a difference for us, all right? So the recap on this is very simple. Do not consume polyunsaturated fats. Consume as little as possible. There's polyunsaturated fats in almost all the fats that we eat. But the problem is we are consuming huge levels of vegetable oils that are mostly polyunsaturated fats. And in turn, we are building cells that are oxidizing, just like this car right here. All right? So we got the first one, sugar. Don't eat 12 candy bars of sugar at every meal. The second one is don't overconsume polyunsaturated fat. So what is the third part to this pattern to improve the development and the longevity and the health of our people? All right. The last one is, and it's a term you've heard before, antioxidant. A substance that inhibits oxidation, prevents its breakdown, especially ones used to counteract the deterioration of stored food products. All right, so we're preventing breakdown. Well, how's this work? Well, an antioxidant is like the wax on your car. It prevents this oxidation. So if you keep this car waxed, it looks like this one. It ain't brand new, but it look good, right? So as long as you keep the car waxed, you keep it protected. So how does that work? So you got this guy right here, the free radical, all right? And this guy is missing an electron, so he would really like to pick one up. Well, when this cell wall or cell membrane is made out of polys, remember how they're all deformed? They got all those little hydrogens hanging off of them, and they will easily give them up. So this cell will this free radical will come along and it'll steal an electron, all right? And then that'll cause this lipid to be cut out of the cell membrane, and then this membrane begins to break down. But if your cell wall or your car is waxed in this vitamin E right here, it has electrons to give up to this free radical. The free radical picks up its electron, it becomes whole again, and is on its way. And now the cell wall doesn't break down. The car stays nice and shiny, right? No oxidation. So the better wax we put on the car, the better off the car is going to be, right? So what is a good wax? Well, waxes are rated in ORAC value, or oxygen radical absorbent capacity. So the more of these little radicals they can absorb, the better they are. All right. So let's take a look at a few. All right. Rosemary has an extremely high ORAC value, and so does oregano, 175,295. And then rosemary, 165,280. All right, extremely high ORAC values, extremely high quality waxes. But you also got dark chocolate candy over here with an ORAC value of 20,844. Not an extremely high like we do have over here, but you can easily consume 100 grams of chocolate over 100 grams of oregano. So we can consume a lot more chocolate compared to our ability to consume oregano. So that makes dark chocolate a great antioxidant. Now, some others you might be familiar with. The number one antioxidant for Americans today is coffee, and it's not too terrible high, all right? But then we also have wine, which has other positive effects on the body, but plus it has a really decent ORAC value. And look how it compares to something that we might imagine has a very high ORAC value, and that's blueberries at 4,669. All right? So, just wax the car. If you keep your body high in antioxidants, the cell membranes will not break down, and your car will remain shiny, beautiful. All right? So let's do the recap again. What are the three parts of the pattern that lead to wonderful development and longevity? All right? Don't eat 12 candy bars of sugar at every meal, and you might be and not even know it. No or decreased polyunsaturated fats do not build your body, which is mostly made up of fat. Don't build it out of fat that oxidizes or breaks down easily. It's simple. Antioxidants. That means protect that fat, all right? Wax that car. If you wax the car, it's going to look good for a long, long time. Doesn't matter how old it gets, all right? Now, how does all that translate? How do those patterns translate to the people mentioned at the beginning? Well, who's the first one? Janine Clement. So how did I come to know this lady? I'm standing there one day, and my daughter walks up to me and pulls on my shirt. Dad. The oldest living person ever lived to be 175. And I'm like, whatever. I'm like, all right, let's look it up. So I pulled out my phone, and I searched Google, and I found this lady right here. All right, Janine Clement. And I start reading about her, and I'm like, so the first thing is she attested her long life to olive oil, no polys, all right? And she's building her cell membranes out of good fat. I'm like, man, this is fitting my pattern. Then I read she eats 2 pounds of chocolate a week. Again, great wax, but not only great wax, but cocoa butter is really good fat, very low in polys. And then she's doing port wine, high in antioxidants, great blood flow. I mean, this lady fit the pattern perfectly. So I fired this off to a friend of mine, and he fires me back this. The longest current living person. She lived on her own till the age of 115. When asked about her secret to longevity, she said she never used drugs and she eats raw eggs every day. Again, she's using low to no polys. She's building her cell membranes out of the best fat possible. She also said, I drink a glass of homemade brandy every day and often enjoy chocolate. But above all else, she says she thinks positively about the future, but in the end, she credits her long life to her diet of raw eggs and being single. Again, fitting the pattern exactly. Then come the folks from Acroli, Italy. All right, so what's their deal? Well, 1 in 10 live to be 100. All right. And 20% of those live to be 110. So what are they doing? Sure enough, anchovies, all right, very low in polyunsaturated fat. They have high consumptions of olive oil. Again, very low polys. Wine, all right, high ORAC value. But you know what? They have rosemary with every single meal. The ORAC value of rosemary is 165,280. Folks, they are waxing that cell. They are waxing those cell walls, preventing their oxidation. All right? Then the Okinawans. Now, these people have probably been the famous for the longest for their longevity. All right? But I start to read about them, and the first thing I discover is they eat a little bit of polyunsaturated fat. They eat bean curd. Well, I mean, that sounds healthy, or tofu. It sounds healthy, but it's soy, and that soy is high in polyunsaturated fat. So they eat about 5% of their calories from that, so about 10 grams. But if you're going to live out the perfect life, I don't know if that fits our pattern. I mean, Americans definitely eat more. We're probably eating somewhere around 16 grams of polyunsaturated fat a day. So I guess they're okay on their fat, but I don't know if it's ideal. And then I read a little further. Long story short, 69% of their calories come from the sweet potato. Well, that's a starch. Or you could even call it a sugar, right? So they're not fitting the pattern. And I'm like, what's going on here? And so I started to dig just a little deeper, and I found it. You look up the sweet potato. A sweet potato is 769% of the daily recommended value of vitamin A. So folks, they are getting 769% of what they're recommended of vitamin A in 1 cup of sweet potatoes. All right. What's vitamin A? What makes that so revealing? Vitamin A is the antioxidant. Folks, they are waxing their cells. Not only are they getting 769%, folks, they're eating 4 times that. They are getting 3,268% of the daily recommended value of vitamin A. Folks, they're waxing that car nonstop. That's all they do. And now we know, I mean, they're doing it in industry. Vitamin A in large doses is proven to create an antioxidant potential within tissue. They've proven it in rats, and they're actually, in the meat industry, are supplementing it to the cows before they're butchered to prolong the shelf life of the meat. Folks, they're waxing their cells. They're preventing the oxidation or the breakdown of the fat, what their bodies is made most of. This is wonderful information as long as we can rationalize it, take it in, and realize it really makes the difference. So I got one more to show you, and it's this folk right here. So what this cow represents is industry and what we already know about healthy, long animal life. So I have this group, and one of the gentlemen that joins the group, he raises cows for a living. And I'm like, hey, boss, thanks for joining us. We cut refined carbs, all right? We don't eat a lot of refined sugar in our diet. He's like, oh, yeah. I said, we did a trial feeding sugar to our cows, and that ended badly, so we definitely don't do that. I'm like, all right, cool, good. I'm like, hey, we cut oils high in polysaturated fat, and we eat coconut oil and butter. And he's like, oh, yeah? He's like, we like to feed our cows coconut oil and beef tallow. Huh? I'm like, oh, really? I'm like, okay. Well, we want antioxidants in our diet, Dean, all right? So we do cinnamon and we use spices high in ORAC value. He's like, oh, yeah? We feed our cows cinnamon and oregano. I'm like, industry already knows what it takes, all right? You know why they know? Because they're rational with all the information. They don't make emotional decisions about what to feed their cows. They feed a cow, they see the results, they rationalize the results, and they make a better decision. It's simple what works. We just got to become completely rational. Recap. Sugar. Don't eat 12 candy bars worth of sugar at each meal, and you probably are. We need to eat very little polyunsaturated fat. Our body is mostly made out of fat, so we don't want to eat fat that is susceptible to pre-oxidation. And we want to protect our fat with antioxidants. We want to wax that car. Will this fix all of our developmental problems for our children? Will this fix all of our health problems? I can tell you this. We must start with these fundamentals and quit chasing around symptoms. When we can communicate this to our people, we can change the health of our nation. Imagine a child not stuck on this sugar roller coaster and trying to focus in school. Imagine them not have to deal with the pain of obesity. Imagine them not having to deal with diabetes. Imagine that for our entire nation. Folks, take in this information, rationalize it, and live a better life.